So in the world of bass fishing, there's literally only one bait that you can fish vertically without actually moving horizontally. And that, my friends, is going to be a drop shot. Today what I want to do is I want to break down all of the things I wish somebody would have told me about a drop shot before I actually ever picked one up, because there's a lot that goes into it and it's a lot more than people think. But we're going to break down all the hooks, weights, everything, the leader lengths, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. So it's no secret that a drop shot catches fish all year round. It is east coast to west coast, summer to winter time. It catches fish in every single condition, whether it's windy, calm, they just flat out eat it. But there's a bunch of different ways that I like to rig it that a lot of people don't always think about, and how you rig it really can change what's going on with it. So the one way that people always rig it is they nose hook it. They hook it straight through the tip of the nose and they leave that hook exposed, and there's nothing wrong with that. That catches a lot of fish. But one way that I like to nose rig it, when I nose rig it, is I put it back from the nose a little bit and I just bring it forward on the bottom side of the bait, and I bring that hook point just till it almost enters the nose, but it doesn't. And so you can see already that worm sits on top better. And what it does is that keeps it weedless, so it won't catch on anything as much, and it keeps that bait positioned straight up and down instead of moving around. But nose hooking it is the first way that I want to rig it. The second way that I rig it that not many people really do is I actually will wacky rig it. And I'll just hook it straight through the side. That is probably one of my absolute favorite ways to largemouth fish with a drop shot, is wacky rigging it on there. Because what you get is you just get that worm doing all kinds of crazy things, but I specifically only do that when I'm fishing around cover. I'm not going to cover water as much with that. If I want to cover water, what I will do, and this is kind of a cool way that I learned from Aaron Martins, who is one of the greatest at this technique, was instead of nose hooking it or wacky rig it, you would hook it just a little bit offset on the side there like that. And what that would do is that would get that bait to just kind of kick around. And it actually dances pretty cool, and it's a killer for smallmouth because it's just a way of showing them a little bit something different. And then you can always Texas rig it with a worm style hook instead of a nose hook, but I will get into the types of hooks that I like to use later. But those are the ways that I really like to rig it, and you can kind of venture, and there's no wrong way to rig it, is the big important part that people don't understand. So now let's get into the leader length. This is probably the one thing that I hear people argue about more than anything else, and there's always a right way to do it and everybody else's way is wrong. Well, there's really no wrong way to do it. What I do, for me personally, is I reel, when I tie my leader up, depending on whatever knot you use, I use a uni to uni. It's the easiest way for me, and it works the best for me. FG knots are also super awesome, but I don't like to sit down and tie them, and I've never had a problem with a uni to uni, and it goes through my guides just fine. So find a knot that you like to tie that clicks. When you find a knot that you like, it'll click, and it just stays with you. That's the biggest thing, first off, for your leader. But your leader length, what I do is I'll tie my knot, and I will just reel my knot until it goes into my reel. So that way it goes all the way out the rod and all the way back down. That way I don't have to worry about that knot when that fish gets close, going in and out of my guides. It'll already be in my guides, and I don't have to worry about it. Because so many times when you get it close and that fish is straight down and you're trying to lift the rod to grab the fish, if that knot is up in that general vicinity, it can really like dead stop fish and stop your line, and you can lose fish because of it. So I do recommend making it a little bit longer, because it just will save you in the long run, especially if you're fishing up north like I do a lot of times. If you're fishing down south, you can get away with shorter leaders, but I don't think you have to do it, because a lot of times you're casting it and that braid keeps that line tight and straight hooked to them, and it works a lot better that way. Also guys, if you're new to the channel, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button to follow along with the regular content that I have coming out every week. But let's dive back in to a drop shot. So the next leader length that I want to talk about is your hook to your actual weight, because everybody also, I've had so many people come up to me and be like, it needs to be 12 3/4 inches, and that is it. It's not true at all. So the one thing you have to think about when you're making your hook to your weight length is, are you dropping it or are you casting it? Because as you cast it, if you're fishing vertically, this is what it looks like, right? But as you cast it and you're dragging it, it's going to be making it shorter and shorter. And so if you're fishing like up on the Great Lakes, or you're making long casts down in Florida or wherever you happen to be fishing and you're dragging it, if you have a short leader because you want to keep it just off the bottom like 6 inches, but you cast it, now all of a sudden your bait is only off the bottom like 2 inches. So if you're making long casts, you really have to adjust how long your hook is to your weight, so that way it'll keep your bait off the bottom more. But it just depends on how far you're casting and where you're fishing. Most of the time when you're fishing in drop shot, you're not making super far casts. Unless you're smallmouth fishing, trying to cover water, it's a lot of target-oriented fishing. So typically I like to run my leader from my hook to my weight anywhere from 10 to 15 inches, somewhere to just keep it off the bottom. But if the fishing's really tough, sometimes you might want to make that longer so you can move it a lot more. I just hook myself in the thumb. Or sometimes if you're fishing really hard bottom, you can make it shorter, but a lot of times the benefit of that drop shot is when you're fishing silted areas, your weight will go into the mud and your weight or your bait will stay out of the mud. So that way it'll stay right in those fish's faces. So another big thing that people tend to overlook is the weights that you're fishing. The drop shot weight itself. There's 3 types. There's a cylinder weight, there's a teardrop weight, and there's a round weight. Those are the 3 types, and you have to know when to fish each one. Now, the one that I use most often is a cylinder weight. I can pour my own really, really easily. And the benefit to that is if I'm fishing and I want to make it a little bit lighter, I can literally take a pair of wire cutters and make it shorter. Take some of that weight right off of there. But the beauty of a cylinder weight is it goes through grass and around wood extremely well. It also goes through rock a little bit, pretty decent. But the round weight, that's where that shines. That shines on round or on rock and harder bottom because it gives you more surface area to feel everything on the bottom. That's where that's important. As far as tungsten versus lead, if I'm fishing somewhere that has muddy bottoms that I'm trying to fish around to feel hard bottom, then I will use a tungsten weight. But most oftentimes I can see it on my graph anyway with my, I have 5 graphs. I can look on my 360 or my live scope and see the hard spots. I've usually already idled over them. But if you're somebody that doesn't have nice electronics, spending a little more money for tungsten weights can really, really help you because you can feel the bottom more than you have to see it. So that's a huge benefit to the tungsten, but most oftentimes I go with the cylinder weight. The teardrop weight is just kind of that in between. I really don't use it a whole lot. Like I said, I typically stick to that cylinder weight just because I fish around a lot of grass, around a lot of wood, and it really fits my style of fishing. But just pick one that suits where you're at and suits your comfort zone, and that'll make it a whole lot easier. So there's hooks that go with drop shotting. I really only use 2 types of hooks. I use a smaller size hook that is a TK150 from Trocar. I'll have it linked down below. But it's a smaller hook that has a straight eye. I think that's key for me because it actually holds that bait straight out. And that's what I'm going to use for smallmouth fishing most of the time. And the biggest thing when it comes to looking for a drop shot hook that I pay attention to is the gap from the hook point to the shank of the hook. Because what you have is if you have a real thin gap, then you're not holding on to a lot of meat. And we all know how airborne smallmouth like to get. So when I'm picking my hook, that's why I like the TK150 is there's a wide gap there. So when that fish eats it and I hook it, it's going to go into the roof of his mouth and it's going to go right into the meat and have a big holding point. Now the other hook that I like to use is going to be a TK180 and it is a Finesse worm hook. And that one is basically just when I'm going to be, rigging a lot of my worms, when I'm largemouth fishing more often, when I'm Texas rigging it, so that way I can make it weedless. It has a plastic keeper on there that's going to hold that bait up on there. But guys, those Trocar hooks with that laser point on there, it's like what's the best way to describe it? Kind of like a blade on the sides and on the bottom. Dude, I never thought hooks were that big of a deal. Hooks are very important, but when it comes to the style of the hook point, I started using these Trocar hooks, and this isn't like a plug or anything. It straight up digs deeper into the roof of their mouth. I was using this when I was down in the Tennessee River, and I was having to fight to get hooks out of the fish's mouth. Same thing with wacky rig hooks when I was down in Alabama. It was hard to get the hook out. And it was insane to see the difference versus a typical round style point that I typically used. That blade style point, man, when it gets in there, it gets in there. And it was really, really incredible to me to see that. The last thing that I want to talk about is the rods that you use with drop shotting. Because you see guys basically just pick a spinning rod and go with it. And that's not what you need to do. There's an important aspect to the rods that I use for largemouth and smallmouth. If I'm using the Finesse worm hook, that TK180, I'm gonna go with a little bit heavier rod, typically like a medium fast or a medium heavy fast action rod, maybe a 7.6, 7.1. And it's a little bit stiffer rod, but the key is I want a rod that has that parabolic bend. And I don't mean like a noodle rod or a crankbait style rod, but I just want that rod to load up evenly, so that way when I hook a fish, when they start digging around and doing goofy stuff, because when you're drop shotting, you're using like 5 to 12 pound line, we'll say. And if you have a rod that has a fast tip and it unloads real quickly, when those fish jump, they can throw a lot of those hooks. So it's really important to have those rods that load up, because when I hook a fish on a drop shot, I'm just going to reel and lean. And that's how you're going to get the best hookup percentage for this type of fishing. It's not one of those slack line hook sets. You see guys like Scott Canterbury do it, and you can do it, but you're going to lose fish that way. You know, Brandon Pollock, a guy who's great at drop shotting, does it a lot. And you see them using those parabolic bend rods. And that just means it's going to bend fairly evenly from the tip to the butt section. It's going to load up. And that is the key to throwing a drop shot, because when those fish are jumping and they're moving around the boat and doing goofy stuff, it gives you a little more cushion, especially when those fish are close to the boat and they take that last second dive. You're not going to break fish off and you're not going to lose as many fish, which is always important, especially if you guys are tournament anglers like myself. So we've talked a lot about how to rig a drop shot up. If you want to learn how to rig a swim bait up, check this video out. But as always, guys, God bless. Thank you guys so much for watching. All of the gear will be linked down below. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to follow on with the channel. But God bless, guys. I hope y'all take care.